My name was Emma. I was 42 years old when this happened. 3 kids, 2 boys, 1 girl, and a job I simply could not afford to lose. My husband had lost his job just a month earlier. And that morning, I was sitting at my desk, staring at a document I had already seen before. But something was different. My hand was resting on the mouse. The cursor blinked on the screen. Once, twice, 3 times. And I realized I hadn't moved in almost 10 seconds. Around me, the office was moving like a normal day. Someone was laughing near the coffee machine. 2 analysts were arguing about a report. The air conditioning hummed quietly in the background. But inside my head, everything had gone completely silent. Because the document on my screen showed something that should not exist. My project, my work, months of development, and someone else's name listed as the owner, Brian. In that moment, I felt something strange in my stomach. It wasn't anger yet. It was something worse. That slow, heavy feeling of realizing something very wrong was happening, and that maybe I had been too naive to notice it sooner. And while I stared at that screen, one question started forming in my mind. A simple question, but a terrifying one. At what point did everything go wrong? If someone had asked me a year earlier whether I trusted my boss, I would have answered without hesitation, yes. His name was Jim, and for 3 years he had been exactly the kind of leader every professional hopes to work for. Direct, practical, and above all, fair. He was the one who approved my promotion to project manager. He was the one who defended my name in meetings with directors, and he was the one who gave me the biggest opportunity of my career, Project Atlas, an initiative that could completely change the way the company analyzed market data. For months, I practically lived for that project. There were nights when I was sitting at my kitchen table at 10 at night, my kids already asleep, my husband trying not to make noise so he wouldn't distract me, while I adjusted reports, reviewed presentations, and built forecasting models. I truly believed in that work. And to be fair, Jim seemed to believe in it too. Until Brian arrived.
Brian was hired as director of strategy. In the first meeting, he looked exactly like the type of executive companies love to hire. Confident, articulate, charismatic. He asked smart questions, took notes, and constantly praised the team's work. During the second week, he started attending Project Atlas meetings. By the third week, he was already participating in strategic discussions. By the fourth week, he started asking for access to the internal project documents. At the time, that didn't seem strange. Companies grow, projects evolve, more people naturally become involved. But looking back now, there were signs, small signs, things I ignored. Brian started replying to emails that had originally been sent to me. He began asking for presentation drafts before meetings, and he started doing something that, at the time, I interpreted as genuine interest. He asked a lot of questions about technical details, about historical data, about strategic decisions that had been made months earlier. Today, I understand exactly what that was. He was learning everything about the project. The first truly uncomfortable moment happened during a meeting with internal investors. Jim was presenting the early results of Project Atlas. Brian was sitting next to him. When it came time to explain the technical structure, Brian started speaking. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't an obvious theft, but he explained the system, the models, the logic behind the platform, as if he had helped build it. I remember looking at Jim in that moment, expecting him to say something like, "Emma led this part," but he didn't. He just let Brian continue. That afternoon, I went back to my desk with a strange feeling. It wasn't outrage, not yet. It was more like a quiet doubt, that uncomfortable sensation you try to ignore because accepting that something might be wrong is far more unsettling. The moment everything truly changed happened about 3 weeks later. I was reviewing project documents when I noticed a new update in the system, a new version of the strategic plan, updated that morning. I opened the document, and that's when I saw it for the first time. Brian listed as the primary project lead. My name was still there, but now it appeared as operational support. My first thought was simple. This must be a mistake. Maybe someone updated the wrong file. Maybe it's just a draft. But something inside me said this wasn't an accident. So I did something I had never done before. I opened the version history. And that's when the real shock happened. Brian hadn't just reviewed the document. He had rewritten entire sections, changed descriptions, altered responsibilities, and slowly reshaped the narrative of the project as if he had been leading it from the beginning. My heart started beating faster, and in that moment, I realized something important. This hadn't happened overnight. This had been happening quietly for weeks. I stood up from my chair and walked to the bathroom, closed the door, locked it, and stood there for a few seconds staring at my reflection. I didn't want to cry, but tears came anyway, because two things were happening inside my head at the same time. First, I was realizing someone might be trying to take something I had spent months building. Second, I was thinking about my life outside that office. My husband still looking for work, 3 kids depending on my stability, and a career I had spent years building. I placed my hands on the sink and took a deep breath. And that was the moment I made a decision. If something was really happening, I needed to understand exactly what it was. Over the next few days, I started paying attention to everything. Meetings, emails, documents. I spoke casually with colleagues, reviewed older files, and slowly began putting together a puzzle. Brian was being included in strategic discussions. Brian was being introduced as responsible for decisions. Brian was receiving credit in reports. And the most unsettling part, Jim seemed to be allowing it. I started saving document versions, capturing editing histories, archiving emails, not because I was planning a confrontation, but because a part of me already knew that eventually something would break. The confrontation finally happened during an executive meeting. We were sitting in a glass conference room on the 12th floor. Jim, Brian, and 2 directors. When the presentation started, Brian once again began explaining Project Atlas, but this time I was ready. When it was my turn to speak, I projected the original version of the project plan onto the screen, with dates, with edit history, with authorship. Silence. Brian stopped talking. Jim looked down at the documents. The directors leaned forward, examining the screen. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse anyone. I simply showed the facts, version by version, change by change, responsibility by responsibility. And slowly, the narrative started to collapse. The meeting ended without immediate decisions, but a few weeks later, things began to change. Brian stopped attending certain meetings, projects were quietly reassigned, and Project Atlas officially returned under my leadership. Nothing dramatic, no announcements, no apologies, just the silent way the corporate world often corrects something without admitting a mistake was ever made. Months later, I still thought about that experience. Not with anger, but with clarity. Companies don't betray people. People inside companies sometimes do. And in the corporate world, there's one lesson I will never forget. Trust matters, but documentation matters even more. If you enjoy real stories about the hidden side of corporate life, consider subscribing to the channel, because these stories happen more often than people realize.